Do you remember growing your first $900 tomato and thinking, gosh, if I just had gone to the grocery store, it would have been way cheaper? Yeah, same. But we are not doing that anymore. Welcome to the Food, Farm, and Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Graff, and together we are going to build our farms, homesteads, and gardens without destroying our finances. So let's get that bag of soil and money.
Welcome back to the Food, Farm, and Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Graff, and today we are talking about something that is really, really great. Gardening with $0 and no monies, okay? Because let me tell you, this is how I started out with no monies, and I still have no monies. So we are going to get into it. Now, last week, I had a podcast episode that was based entirely around using gardening to become a millionaire. And the whole concept of that episode, and if you haven't listened to it, you absolutely should, but the whole concept of that episode is building margin into your life. Basically, you're cutting costs in certain areas so you can invest in your education, or you can invest in a business, or you can invest in the market and really put your money to work for you, which could ultimately make you be a millionaire. And I thought gardening is a great way to do it because the average household grocery bill is obscene. It is bad. So it's a great area that you can cut some of your budget, offset that budget with gardening, and then hopefully invest it and become a millionaire. So the biggest thing though, I think is a hurdle is how do you even get started? Because some of us are starting with zero capital. We have no money to even start the garden, to even consider offsetting our grocery bill, to even potentially be able to invest, right? How do we get going? We don't have the funds to do it. So that's what this entire episode is going to be about. We're going to get into it. I'm going to share all of my favorite no money, cost-effective ways to get going. Some of these will be more like low money, but this is the way to start your garden if you truly cannot afford really anything, okay? So, quick message from our sponsors, and then we'll get into it. Today's sponsor is a real sponsor. It's still me, but it's Duck River Apothecary. This is my herbal tea and wellness business. If you don't mind popping over there, grab a tea. The whole concept of these teas are to be A, cozy and delicious, but B, to inspire wellness and bring all the goodness and benefits of herbs into your life. So if you don't mind supporting me just a little bit, sit down with a cup next time you're listening to this podcast. Again, that's duckriverapothecary.com. We ship all across the United States, except to you people in Alaska and Hawaii. We do not handle you yet, but one day we will. It's okay. You just live far away. All right, back to the episode. All right, no cost gardening, basically. All right, that is what this whole concept is going to be about. And I'm going to hit you with several different ways that you can get going and just some little hacks that can help you budget on a plan. So, garden on a budget. So the first thing I would start doing if I had $0 is I would start composting. Now, I know you're like, wow, riveting, exciting. But the thing is, a lot of people don't realize soil is incredibly expensive. And compost takes a long time to get going. So I would take any yard waste, if you have yard waste, like leaves, grass clippings, other organic materials, and all of your kitchen scraps. So fruit, vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, eggshells, use all of those things. Really just create a compost pile. If you have space outside, do it outside. If not, I've seen lots of videos where people take like little cheap Tupperwares and they do it under the counter, etc. I'm not necessarily advocating for that. I think a lot of the things in this episode actually cater a little bit more to people with yards and a little bit of space, but I do think you can make this work even if you are in an apartment and you don't have a ton of space, okay? So the biggest thing I would say is start composting. You're going to need soil, you're going to need potting mix, etc. That's probably going to be one of your biggest costs if you do not have ground outside. So that for container gardening, for example, potting mix is incredibly expensive. For raised bed gardening, potting mix and raised bed mix and filling those raised beds can cost an absolute fortune. So that brings me into my next point. If you have space, or you can maybe find space, you should be gardening in the ground if you don't have any money. Don't go container gardening. Do not go trying to, fill these giant raised beds. Literally turn the earth with a little spade that you borrow from someone. Start in a small little patch. You can make raised beds out of the ground. Garden in the ground if you don't have money. Raised beds are a luxury if you're wanting to buy like those nice fancy wooden raised beds. Luxury. So please just consider tilling up a little space. You can hand till. You don't even have to till really. You could try some no-till methods. But the point is soil and soil amendments are going to be one of the biggest costs in your garden. So if you can cut that out. And even if you have to grow some like questionable subpar vegetables in the beginning as you're working towards building that soil, and you will build that soil. If you start composting, if you start using your kitchen scraps, not kitchen craps, to replenish that soil, you will ultimately build some really good soil structure. So if you don't have space, and if you don't have like a yard, if you don't have a friend's yard that you could garden in the ground, I would even say maybe guerrilla gardening. So if you haven't heard of guerrilla gardening, that is when you plant in public and abandoned spaces. So they're typically overlooked. In a lot of cities, there are a lot of abandoned vacant lots. It's basically like squatting, except you're gardening, or potentially join a community garden, right? So there are definitely loads of spaces that you can probably garden for free. Even if you're in an apartment and you don't have ground, you can really go to those spaces. I know that a lot of community gardens will even let you volunteer, so you don't even have to necessarily like rent a space. You can just volunteer and help at the garden, and then in exchange, you can take some of the plants, you can take some seeds, you can take some produce, etc. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. If you are going to guerrilla garden and try and like convert a lot that's been abandoned into a garden space, do it at your own risk. Maybe talk to the city, etc. And they could maybe even point you in directions of nonprofits that have community gardens available, etc. But plant in the ground if possible. We're going to try and avoid container gardening because it's so expensive to fill those containers. We're going to try and avoid fancy raised wooden beds or metal wooden raised beds because they can be very expensive to fill. This brings me to my other point though, is if you are going to be container gardening in some capacity, then you're going to need containers, right? And containers add up. They can be incredibly expensive. So you can spend literally $40 on one pot to grow one plant. And I'm like, that's obscene. That is crazy talk. We are not spending $40 on a terracotta pot today. No. So if you want a big fancy pot, you can always just go to a Facebook Marketplace, look up used ones, and you might be able to find one there. But that's not a good, really no money approach. Instead, you can use things around your house. And I mean this to the fullest. If you're starting seeds indoors, use your egg cartons to create little eggshell-sized seedling packs. Or you can even use TP rolls, cut up. You can use paper towel rolls, cut up. There's a lot of different ways you can use this. I've also seen this really, really fascinating method where they basically take saran wrap and they lay it out, or sometimes they use parchment paper, etc., put a light amount of soil, and it's called the seed snail. And you sprinkle the seeds on the soil, and it's probably best if there's a visual with this, but you know what? This is a podcast, so we're just gonna do our best. So you've got your saran wrap or your parchment paper laid down in a good rectangle, then you sprinkled some soil on top of that, you sprinkled some seeds, and then you're literally just going to roll it up, kind of like a cinnamon roll. And you're just gonna stand it on its end, and you can start seeds that way. It's really efficient and it's a small space and it's really incredibly cheap. So use what you have around. I famously have a cottage cheese Tupperware. That is one of my planters. I just drilled a little hole in the bottom and here we are. I'm a huge fan of dairy. So my cottage cheese little Tupperware is living on as a little planter. It's completely doable. Use little metal cans from, like green bean cans, vegetable cans, canned goods, And those can actually be really cute. The cottage cheese planter, not so cute. I mean, it's giving cottage cheese, you know? It's not giving cottage core. It's giving cottage cheese. Which honestly, that's my life. Giving cottage cheese, not giving cottage core. But use what you have available. If you have like some buckets, that could work too, etc. I think that's the biggest thing that we fall into a trap when we're starting gardening. It's easy to get really excited. So I kind of view it like that principle. It's called the Diderot effect. So the Diderot effect is the story of Diderot. Diderot was just some guy. I don't know if he's a real person. I don't know if it's just a story. I have no idea. But basically, he had nothing. He was broke as a joke, except a gorgeous library. And some queen or czar wanted to have this library. So she bought this entire library from him. And then Diderot became rich overnight. But Diderot decided to buy a nice outfit to go thank the queen. And when he bought that outfit, he hung it in his closet and he looked at all his other outfits and realized, holy crap, those suck. So he bought all new outfits, thus the Diderot effect, basically meaning one purchase naturally lends to another purchase and it will compound and spiral on top of one another. Same thing happens in a house. You get a new piece of furniture, you're like, wow, the rest of this room really needs to be updated. So you buy 17 new pieces of furniture, you repaint, you redecorate, and everything is different, thus the Diderot effect. And the garden is the worst about the Diderot effect, okay? You buy one plant, then you're buying 74 plants, then you buy one raised bed, then all of your beds need to become that raised bed style, and then you buy this and this and this and this and this, and it's the Diderot effect on the Diderot effect on the Diderot effect. So get ahead of the Diderot effect in the garden, and don't even start buying stuff for the garden. Slow your roll and focus on what you already have around here, because let me tell you, once you start making some purchases for your garden, you will never ever stop. And my budget for my garden is a testament to that. So this brings me to the next point. Garden tools are kind of the basis. Like even if you're just gardening outside, you're gonna probably need some tools. So think like a hoe, a rake, maybe a wheelbarrow. These things are surprisingly expensive. I went to buy a wheelbarrow. It was like a down payment on a Porsche. I would have sworn. I was like, why is this wheelbarrow $250? I am not paying this. Like, this is obscene and crazy. So next thing you know, I'm like messaging all these people trying to borrow a wheelbarrow. Long story short, my friends did not come in clutch. Nobody helped me out. I bought my own wheelbarrow. But I do think that there are a lot of ways to find some cheaper tools. And I would just go with the absolute bare minimum at first. So see if you can borrow a hoe from somebody. See if you can find a secondhand shovel on Facebook Marketplace. The amount of shovels and hoes and wheelbarrows that are just laying around in people's backyards is kind of crazy. So look in Facebook Marketplace, ask around, ask some friends, and just be like, hey, does anyone know if there's like a spare shovel that someone could let me borrow or I could just have? Because I'm trying to do this thing, and tell them what you're trying to do. And odds are they might be like, yeah, here, no big deal. You can also use DIY tools. So one of my favorite planting tool in the entire garden is actually a kitchen knife. So I literally love using kitchen knives. I take them out and I use them to create my transplant holes in the garden and to remove transplants from the plug flats or the seed trays. And that is my favorite tool. And I have so many kitchen knives. Actually, well, not anymore because I am irresponsible and I leave them in the garden. But the point is that you can absolutely 100% do this on the cheap. You don't need huge fancy tools. And if you do need a couple of those tools, really work hard to see if you can find someone that you can borrow them from. Which brings me to scavenging for materials. So if you do decide that you want to do a raised bed, consider trying to find recycled, refurbished wood, ideally not pressure treated. We do not like pressure treated wooden garden beds. But there's a load of recycled materials. So there are even municipalities in this state of Tennessee, and I can't speak for everywhere else. I know my municipality, my area does not have this option, but I know just one county away has this option, and it's frustrating because if I was a resident like of that county and I literally live 5 miles away from that county, I could have access. They do all these things and they use these community mulch bins. So anytime the city services are out trimming trees or etc., they're creating compost with those and mulches with those. And then you, as a resident of that city, are allowed to come and get that for free. So there's a lot of ways. That's really, really cool. Or there's also this company called Chip Drop. This is not an ad. I personally had a really bad experience with Chip Drop in the sense that I signed up for Chip Drop and never once got a Chip Drop. And it's been like years and years. Meanwhile, my parents, who live in the same county as me, got like 12 Chip Drops. So they have all of this mulch. So if you don't know what Chip Drop is, basically it is a platform that connects arborists and people who are cutting down trees and need a place to dump mulch with homeowners who would like mulch. So my parents got like all this Chip Drops and I'm like, I want a Chip Drop. And they're like out here hoarding mulch and I just want one little load of mulch for my little garden and nobody's letting me have this mulch. The point is, there are resources like this, sometimes at a city level, sometimes at a county level, or you can sign up for Chip Drop, see how that goes for you. And you will get free gardening materials, free mulch, which mulch will really help hold moisture in your soil. And over time, it will really help build up your soil. Also, there are a lot of programs that will help you start your garden for free. So this is my favorite resource, and nobody talks about this. But seed libraries. So most libraries in the country now have seed programs. So not only can you borrow books about gardening and farming and etc., you can actually check out seeds. You can get a set amount of seeds from your local library and it's free. And then they also have free gardening workshops. So they will send you links to how to learn how to garden and where to garden. And those places will provide you so many resources in your area for how to garden and garden really, really cheaply. I think libraries are highly underutilized in the country and they're a great resource. Gardening books are very expensive. So go to your library and read them. And I know people are like, I just look stuff up online. Let me tell you, a good gardening book is gold, okay? So consider taking 10 minutes of your life and sitting down and just reading a few chapters, seeing what you get out of it. And if you get something out of it, woo, woo, woo. Because let me tell you, my favorite gardening content is old school content where people like didn't have cell phones. The people did not have blogs. So they aren't posting things online. Some of the best, richest gardening content is these old school books where people are just like documenting what they've done in their garden. And I love it. And maybe you would too. But free seeds at libraries. There's also nonprofits that give you free seeds. They can be online. So if you don't have access to a local library, if you're really far away in a rural area, you can absolutely order seeds online for free. There's loads of seed exchange programs as well. So you pretty much don't have to spend money on garden seeds unless you want to. That's right. No money for seeds. I know. I'm the same way. There is nothing I enjoy more than sitting down with a good seed catalog and one of my hot teas and just spending every dollar I've ever earned. Knowing dang well I do not have space for any of these varieties, but I'm like, ooh, look at that, a ruby courgette. And I'm like, I need the ruby courgette. And meanwhile, knowing good and well, I'm American and we call them zucchinis. And I do not need that variety because that variety probably is not going to be super prolific. But if you want to do that, maybe you do that with like a library seed program or a seed exchange program so that it's a lot cheaper on you. This also brings me to additional local resources like rainwater harvesting. Now, this is really controversial. There are actually a lot of municipalities that do not let you harvest rainwater. That is a whole different topic that actually upsets me, but I'm sure there are some reasons. I don't want to get into any of that or the politics of any of that. But a lot of municipalities now have rainwater harvesting programs. So, for example, our local farmers market here, a tiny little farmers market, but the city went ahead and provided rainwater collection barrels for people at this market one weekend. So basically, all you had to do was sign up, say you were going to add this rain barrel kit to one of your gutters and use it for your garden at home. And I did that as well. And you would be so surprised. It, of course, depends on the rainfall in your area, but it can save so much money on watering. Watering a garden can be incredibly expensive. So harvesting your own rainwater, having that downspout in the gutter can really, really help offset that, because I'm hooked up to city water. So when I water, it is directly cost me. Like, it costs me more than just the electricity, if that makes sense. So growing up, I was on a well, so it was just kind of like, it's fine. Like, we're just pumping a little bit of electricity. It's not much. But here, now we are charged by the gallon. So it's really nice when I don't have to spend any money to water my garden. And it's also probably a lot better for the plants than using like city water that's chlorinated, etc. So definitely consider that. And yeah, I think these are my top tips for just getting started gardening on the cheap. So go to the library, get free seeds, grow in the ground, start composting as soon as you can. Reach out to your local municipalities, try and see, are there resources for free mulch, free amendments, free soil, etc. Because a lot of cities have these programs in place. And then if they don't, consider signing up for Chip Drop or a similar service. Talk to people. Tell them what you're doing. Tell them that you're looking for a shovel and you don't want to spend money on a shovel, and tell them why. There is no shame in telling people that you're on a budget and that things are a little tight right now, so you don't want to splurge on a shovel. Okay? There's no shame in that, because shovels are surprisingly expensive. And then, of course, if you don't have access to ground, consider joining a community garden. Consider joining, some sort of nonprofit in your area that actively is gardening, or, start a guerrilla garden. I'm not advocating for you to become a garden squatter, but, I do think there is a lot to be gained from gardening on ground that is being considered vacant and underutilized in cities and local areas. So I think there are so many ways that you can garden for cheap. And I think we tend to get really caught up in the commercialism side of it, because gardening, just like anything else, can be very hobby centric. So we don't look at this as like a very practical, like, okay, I'm going to focus and I'm going to make this a budget sport, right? We look at it and we're like, I'm gonna get what I want because those look cool. I've never seen a tomato like that, knowing dang well that this tomato is gonna be the worst growing tomato you've ever grown. But you are gonna get it because it's funky, plunky, and chunky. And you do, and you're like, wow, I just wasted $7 of my life on that. And so no. So approach it with some practicality, especially if you're just starting, and think to yourself, I want to use this as a tool. So gardening is a great hobby. I'm an advocate. I spend money on my garden, definitely. I don't garden for free. I definitely shop the seed catalogs, etc. But I want you to know that it can definitely be done on the cheap. People always tell me that it's more expensive to grow produce than it is to just buy produce. And those people are doing it the wrong way. It can be done. You just have to be strategic about it, right? So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And remember, if you haven't listened to the episode before where we discuss how you can become a millionaire being a gardener, I really want you to go back and listen to that episode, because utilizing this episode to help get you started on your garden journey would be a great step for gardening to be a millionaire. If you want that, you don't have to want that, and that's totally fine. But like I said, this is the podcast that we're here to build your farm, your gardens, your finances. We want you to do well, and we hope that you want us to do well too. So definitely follow along, subscribe, share, send us a little happy comment, tell us that you're liking this show, give us some ideas of what you want to hear from us, and we will see you in the next episode.